Hi, good evening. I chose to do some additional research or reading concerning the Puritans for this week's assignment. My interest in their history has been based on previous research and nearly constant reference to them, looking back at the religious beginnings of the United States during colonialism, particularly in the 16th and 17th centuries. Far from the only Christian group that sought a new beginning in North America, they were one of the early successes. Puritans shared so many commonalities with other Christian groups, like the Pilgrims, Separatists, Baptists, and Quakers. A significant difference in beliefs, particularly between the Separatists and the Puritans, was the belief that Puritans held that they could change the church from within, not wanting to abandon the Church of England completely as the Separatists desired to do. They felt the Protestant Reformation did not go far enough in removing the lingering Roman Catholic similarities in the church, and they wanted a pure form of Protestantism. Puritans were also only partially focused on escaping England for religious freedoms. They did want to practice their faith without the watching eye of the English church and the government, but they also saw the New World as an economic opportunity. They sought a place to create a biblical commonwealth, as George Carpaccio discusses in his book, Religion in Colonial America. The Puritan hold on New England from the first of the 1,000 passengers who set sail on 17 ships in 1630 to establish this biblical commonwealth was that New England would be a place where the Protestant Reformation would come to fruition, finally free from the corruptions of the Church of England. Moreover, it would serve as a shining example to England and all of Europe of what free people could achieve when guided by God's hand, not weighed down by the dictates of church and state. Conservative in the strictest sense, the people of the Great Migration that began in 1630 to Massachusetts Bay Colony, led by John Winthrop, were focused on building a social and religious community guided by humility, discipline, honesty, and devotion. In the congregational way, they would break away from the ceremonial traits of the Anglican Church: no prayer books, no formal creeds, with Jesus Christ as the head of the church, no pope, no monarch. A church built on the idea of covenants that created a method of democratic decision-making through acceptance into the church as free men, who then would be the social, religious, and law-making body of the colony. The religious leaders relied on the chosen men that served as a civil authority to enforce laws on drunkenness, gambling, swearing, and other devices, particularly on the Sabbath, which was the most religious day of the week. These civil leaders were also charged with ensuring that everyone attended church on the Sabbath, as well as monitoring the people in church that they displayed devoted attention to the sermons. Outside of church, these civil authorities were the moral code police. Anyone who might speak against or act in any way that was contradicting to the congregation or covenants could be whipped, thrown in the stockade, publicly humiliated, or even sentenced to death. We have discussed some of these actions and events as they pertain to Roger Williams and Hutchinson and several Quakers who were hung in Boston. The Puritans relied on conformity for the whole community. Any nonconformity weakened the community and risked invoking God's anger. Patricia Bonomi points out the perils and dangers that Puritans believe awaited them in the North American wilderness, as she puts it. She writes that any sinful men and women may mistake liberty for license, disregard authority, and become worse than brute beasts. The Puritan way forward then was only if church and state were firmly fixed in a mutually reinforcing relationship might the Puritan band fulfill its errand in the wilderness. Covenants worked for the Puritans through its church membership. One had to provide a convincing account of their spiritual conversion experience to be admitted as a church member, therefore a free man and a voting voice in the congregation. The covenant practice was only sustainable through conversion. Mark Knoll, in his book, The Old Religion in a New World, describes the covenant, this Puritan thinking, as the basis for individual salvation as God's covenant, promised that he would redeem those who placed their trust in Christ. Those who came to New England held that the basis for a thoroughly reformed church was the commitment of its members to God and to each other. The Puritans' colonial experiment was unlike others, as they did establish a unified and stable Christian society, therefore successful. They did encounter their own roadblocks, though, to a lasting religious commonwealth. The lack of religious tolerance towards Baptists and Quakers would shake up the people's understanding of compassion and decency towards their fellow men. The treatment of dissenters makes little sense unless we take into account the Puritans' profound commitment to social order as a prerequisite for the coming of God's kingdom, as Bonamy notes in her writings. Knoll also discusses another challenge to their extended hold on the spiritual well-being of New England, the younger generation. Sons and daughters of the first settlers were not experiencing conversion, and therefore there were fewer and fewer second-generation people becoming members of the church. No new converts meant no new covenanted churches and no surviving godly society. Their solution to this dilemma was the halfway covenant, where good-standing baptized people could present their children for baptism, but they could not partake of the Lord's Supper unless they professed the conversion experience. This preserved the local congregations, the elected people to guide these congregations, and guaranteed participation in the Puritan system. Mark Knoll ends his chapter in his book, The Old Religion in a New World, about the kind of decline of the Puritanism in New England, fading in the 18th century, a century that developed widespread economic and intellectual change, quarrels among the churches, and the interests of political ideas that would later be called Democratic and Republican, undercutting the interlocking power of those covenants. Even so, as he mentions, Puritan traits of earnestness, religious dedication to task, and moral seriousness remained alive as powerful influences in New England and much of the United States. I look forward to reading your feedback, and I hope you enjoyed the video and everyone has a good weekend. Stay safe for those of you in the heavy hit winter weather areas.